Hey guys, here it's Coach Matheu, and today I wanted to start with my Play Like a World Champion series, where we look at the world champions of the past and the present. We figure out what made them great, what made them unique, and we try to add their ideas into our games. Actually, we try to steal their ideas and put them in our games. So, we wanted to start with the first official world champion, William Steinitz. Steinitz became the official world champion in 1886. By winning a match against Zuckertor. Yes, people played chess in 1886. So we're going to check out a short game from Steinitz. He's playing white against Vasquez. This is in 1888, so he's already the world champ. And this is in Cuba, Havana, Cuba. All right, so Steinitz playing white. He opens with e4. I mean, this is just the first world champion move. It's a great move to start with. We all know, controls the center. Allows the bishop to come out, and as some of my students like to point out, it also gives you the opportunity to play the 4-move checkmate. So e4, Steinitz plays e4, black plays e6. This is the French defense. Here Steinitz plays d4, and this is just a great idea. Whenever you play e4 as white, and your opponent gives you the option because of their first move to put the 2 pawns in the center, you should do it without even thinking. Put those 2 pawns in the center. If you can get those 2 pawns in the center, you already got space. Both of your bishops can move. It's just a great idea. So d5, black finally challenges the center. And now here, white pushes the pawn instead of trading. And that's why this is called the advanced variation. The pawn advances past. I know you French players watching. You don't have to yell at the screen. We know that the next move here, whenever you see this pawn go to e5 in the French, is typically c5, hitting the pawn chain. At d4, d4 is the best pawn to hit right now because it's not defended by a pawn. So c3, black just continues to attack the pawn chain, keeping the tension. Knight c6. Here Steinitz plays f4, just over defending the e5 pawn, taking a little more space on the king side. Typically, you worry about queen h4 here because f4 does open your king, but g3 would kick the queen out and make it go back. And it would kind of help us develop our bishop to g2. So even though it's a scary check, black would end up losing time after that. So f4. Now c takes d4. A little early to break the tension, as we'll see. Usually black wants to keep this tension until this knight has moved to d2 or a3. So c takes d4 a little early. And now after c takes d4, queen b6. Now there's 2 attackers on that d4 pawn versus 1 defender. So now knight goes to f3, developing the knight. It's important that you don't put the bishop here because then queen takes b2. You lose a pawn, your rook's hanging, and there's still lots of pressure on d4. So after queen b6, knight goes to f3, developing the knight. Knight h6. French players should be somewhat familiar with this move. Of course, it's a little scary to put the knight there first. But on the other hand, if it feels scary to put the knight there, that means you have good coaching because you know that knights typically don't want to go towards the side of the board. However, this knight doesn't want to stay on h6. It wants to head to f5, where we'll be further attacking the d4 pawn. So knight h6. And now this is where I think we really see the downside of when black broke the tension early in this position. Because after knight h6, which doesn't attack the pawn yet, white has time to play knight c3, and the knight gets the perfect square. So now knight f5, attacking the pawn. So there's 1, 2, 3 attackers on that d4 pawn, and only 2 defenders. And once again, bishop e3 doesn't work because, well, that would just give up a piece. So after knight f5, Steinitz makes use of his knight on c3. He goes knight a4 check. Knight a4, attacking the queen. The queen doesn't have time to just take on d4 because of that. The knight will capture back. So after knight a4, you can't capture on d4 yet. Instead, black plays queen a5 check. And here, instead of blocking, actually, Steinitz goes king f2. And I know some of you guys watching the game are going to get checked in your games after this, and you're going to move your king to e2 or f2. And when some coach says, "Well, why'd you do that?" You're going to say, "Well, Steinitz did it." Here, it's important to note why. There's a bit of a reason. There's definitely a reason. So after king f2, the king has gotten away from the queen's checks. And with that, the queen doesn't really have a great use on a5. So for instance, let's say white blocked here. When the bishop comes to b4, let's say trade, queen takes. Now the queen is checking the king still, and there's still pressure on d4. Very annoying for white. So after a move like king f2, which is pretty brave, yes, white can no longer castle, but once I move my bishop and my rook comes to f1, it'll look like I castled. And this queen doesn't have much to do on a5. My d4 pawn is safe, so that means my center is safe. And now I may kick your knight out with g4 at some point. So king f2, bishop goes to d7. This is one of the hardest pieces to develop in the French because it's blocked by the pawns. And here, bishop d7 actually has a little bit of a threat because were this knight to move, the bishop would be attacking knight on a4 along with the queen. And this knight happens to have a square to capture on d4. So let's say g3 happened. Then knight could capture d4, and if knight takes, knight could take, queen could take, and then bishop takes a4. And I mean, even that move makes a threat because now bishop c5 pitting the queen is a threat. So bishop d7, sneaky move. It's always great to develop a piece and have a threat. Bishop d7. So now Steinitz answers that threat with a threat of his own. Now bishop d2 is a big difference. Here, well, when we looked at queen a5 check and bishop d2 happening, we looked at bishop b4, and the idea was when we traded the bishops, this was check, and our d4 pawn was still under attack. Now, if we fast forward to this position, when the bishop comes to d2, and black plays bishop b4, it's a bit of a mistake. Here, after bishop takes, black does knight takes here, but it's important to point out, queen takes isn't even check, and I can just kick your queen out. And I can even further expand with a4 because now your trick on, you don't even have time for a move like knight takes b4 where your bishop will be attacking, because once I do a takes, I revealed my rook as another defender. And let's say the queen goes back, and now I can put my knight right on b6, knight square for the knight, and it's defended. And that's part of the problem with bishop b4. So after bishop b4, white happily trades the bishops, and that was not the bishop that black wanted to exchange. Black would have preferred to exchange the light square bishops. And this is part of what made Steinitz good, knowing which pieces to exchange and how to take advantage of which pieces were exchanged. So white's farthest advanced pawns are on the dark squares, which, as you can see, really limits the prospects of this bishop. Bishop doesn't have many squares to go to. White's dark square bishop, that is. Whereas black's farthest advanced pawns are on the light squares, which makes this dark square bishop black's good bishop. So essentially, white just traded their worst piece for black's best piece. And Steinitz definitely knew about bishops. If you don't believe me, you can check out Coach Logan's videos on using the two bishops. There's a Steinitz scan featured there. So knight takes b4. And now, with the dark square bishop gone, white can start to put pieces on the color of the bishop no longer there. So the knight jumps right into c5. Notice this isn't playable if that dark square bishop is on the board. So knight c5. Beautiful square for the knight because this is an open file and the rook can't even use it with the knight just stuck there. So knight c6. The pawn is free on b7, but there is some stuff to consider, like let's say knight takes b7. Well, now I may go queen b6 and I'm hitting your b7 knight, Your pawn on b2 and d4 is still vacant. And just in general, knights can jump over, but they can't go very far. You don't want to send them to the corner of the board by themselves. And that's exactly what we would see here. Just look how far the knight is from anybody else. Not a good idea. We're going to get our pieces trapped. So after knight c5, after knight c5, black goes back to c6, setting a trap. Sneaky little tactic having to do with, let's say g3 again. Now knight can take on d4, and if this knight captures back, this is free. So Steinitz actually plays a3, which doesn't seem to do anything about that threat. But maybe you can see what Steinitz had in mind if black still goes for knight takes d4. And that's actually what happens. Knight c takes d4. And here Steinitz plays b4, which attacks the queen and defends the knight. And important, this knight doesn't have any valuable checks or intermediate moves, in between moves, to play and then get the queen up. For instance, knight takes, well, I still just take your queen. So now, let's say you go queen c7, I can just take your knight, and knight takes, and queen takes. And I have one material. So b4, and notice, this takes more space on the dark squares, taking advantage of that bishop that is not there. Queen goes all the way to d8. Now knight takes d4, and now that scary check we talked about long ago. Queen h4 check, and here Steinitz sets a nice trap. Goes g3, tempting his opponent. So this blocks the check, but now after knight takes, disrupting the king's cover. When h takes, the rook is hanging, and this is what Steinitz goes for, because he noticed, hey, that queen was doing all the work. All of a sudden, well, look, if we look just a couple of moves ago, black has pieces out, making threats. But now, if we look at this position, queen's the only active piece, and it just moved to the corner. And there's a chance for a discovery here with the queen and the rook for white on the same rank as this undefended queen. If only there was some discovery check. Anyway, Steinitz finds a nice little discovery. The bishop needs to go to a light square. And b5 seems like that, but b5 isn't check. If there was a way to make it check, that would win the queen. So he takes the light squared bishop, and the idea is if king takes, bishop b5 check, and then you lose your queen. So after knight takes d7, this actually brings up a point about the bishop. Notice, once white takes that light squared bishop, he attacks the light squares. Of course, there's a tactical reason behind this, but I just think it makes the positional reasoning more visible. So knight takes d7, queen goes to h2 check, stepping out of the weak first rank. And here, bishop g2, developing a piece, blocking the check, and closing off squares from the queen. And in this position, let's say king finally takes the knight, queen a4 check, king goes to e7, rook h1 traps the queen. There are no useful squares for the queen. And here, black can take, and white takes, and essentially, white is up two pieces because the two rooks would balance out the queen, but then there's a knight and a bishop that goes unaccounted for. So after, where are we? So after knight takes d7 and queen h2 and bishop g2, black resigns. Because even in this position, black's in trouble. And if you don't believe me, those of you at home, you can set up this position against your parents who don't know how to play. And you can play black. And if they beat you, there's your answer right there. So anyway, this game, I showed this game. Just Steinitz was very aware at knowing which pieces to exchange and how to take advantage when those pieces were exchanged. Oh, if you got rid of the dark square bishop, let's attack the dark squares. If you got rid of the light squares bishop, you can attack the light squares. And if you got rid of your opponent's developed pieces, well, let's go attack the king. So yeah, Steinitz, first official world champion in 1886. I wonder who took the title from him. All right, guys, thanks for checking it out. Take care.